By guys, because the Republican leadership is holding a news conference up on Capitol Hill right now. I want to listen in.
We are looking at legislation that contains within it the largest expansion of publicly funded abortion in history. In history. I've been here 30 years. I've been in the pro-life movement for 38 years. And this legislation will massively subsidize, facilitate, and expand abortion on demand throughout all 9 months of pregnancy. I read, and I know my colleagues have as well, an executive order that was put out by President Obama, or will be put out. It has not been released, I guess, yet as official text. But in looking at it, and especially Section 2, you know, unfortunately, Obamacare, this before the House, when it left the House, it had ironclad, comprehensive language that precluded public funding and the facilitation of abortion. When it came back, and this was by design, not by accident, it was riddled with pro-abortion provisions that will massively expand abortion. The Senate bill, for example, permits health care plans and policies funded with tax credits to pay for abortion, so long as the issuer of the federally subsidized plan collects a new congressionally mandated fee from every enrollee in that plan to pay for other people's abortions. Rather than taxing everybody, the people enrolled in that plan will be taxed themselves. So it's a subset, but nevertheless, it's a congressionally mandated tax to facilitate abortion. So if you're in a small business, for example, and Blue Cross Blue Shield happens to be the health care that your small business provides to its employees, and they have abortion on demand right up until the moment of birth being funded, you will then be hit with a new tax imposed upon you by this legislation per enrollee to pay for the abortions of all the other people inside of that plan. I read the Barack Obama executive order, and all as he talks about in Section 2 is how he will implement it. Matter of fact, he talks about the segregation of funds. We've seen that game, that trick, used over and over the years, where they somehow say, oh, we have a pot of money here and a pot of money there, pot of money over here, and if we just separate the funds somehow, that makes it ethically okay. Nothing could be further from the truth. Money is fungible, plus that line of demarcation between the two is false. The bottom line is that unborn children and mothers will be killed by abortion in larger numbers as a direct result of this legislation should it be enacted into law. We call upon our Democratic and Republican friends who value the sanctity of human life to vote no on this legislation.
Thank you. I'm Congresswoman Jean Schmidt from Cincinnati, and I'm chair of the Pro-Life Women's Caucus. And I am deeply disappointed to hear about today's agreement. Simply put, an executive order issued by the president is not worth the paper it is printed on. It is not the law of the land, and it can be rescinded in the blink of an eye by the jot of a president's pen. Some of the Democratic colleagues on the other side of the aisle have already said an executive order doesn't trump law. This could be potentially something that will be changed the moment it is signed. It could potentially happen tomorrow, next week, next month, or next year, but whenever the president signs it, he can change his mind in an instant. There are no guarantees, especially when an executive order is signed by a president who has, unfortunately, a record of turning his back on hard-fought pro-life principles. Groups who have fought tirelessly for the rights of the unborn universally oppose this decision. Among those most notably are the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops and the National Right to Life Committee. They have not bought this language. They disagree with it. They see its flaws. They see its holes. I stand before you tonight to do the same, to fight for the life of the unborn, to oppose this agreement, and to encourage all of my colleagues, especially my pro-life colleagues from across the aisle, to reconsider their positions. Thank you, and God bless the United States of America, born and unborn.
Thank you. I'm Congressman Joe Pitts of the 16th Congressional District of Pennsylvania. From a pro-life perspective, I find absolutely no comfort in this executive order. This puts the fate of the unborn in the hands of the most pro-abortion president in history. This is a career-defining vote on the life issue. Any member of either party who votes for this bill will never, ever be able to claim that they have always stood for the most important and fundamental of all human rights. I congratulate the many pro-life Democrats who continue to hold firm on principle and who will join us in voting against this terrible bill Labor Day. And I commend the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, the National Right to Life organization, and many of the other groups who have spoken up strongly with statements and memos against this executive order procedure. Even Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Congresswoman pro-choice, said, well, it can't be changed by an executive order. An executive order can't change the law, end quote. She said that earlier, I saw on television today. And so there are problems with this procedure. It can't overturn a statute. It can be easily overturned by a court decision or revisited with another executive order. It is full of loopholes, nothing but a reiteration of the segregations of the funds accounting gimmick that we've discussed. There's nothing to apply the Hyde Amendment restrictions on funding for insurance that pay for abortion on demand. It doesn't do anything contrary to the underlying statute. So I urge all of my friends on the other side of the aisle to reconsider and vote against this terrible bill.
You know, by large majorities, Americans, men and women, 70% plus, believe that federal taxpayer dollars should not be used on abortion. That has been, for the last 30 years, protected by the Hyde Amendment. And then most recently, we had this debate come to the forefront with the health care debate. And the Stupak language, the Stupak Amendment that passed in the House made it clear that this would continue to be the law of this land, that federal taxpayer dollars would not be used for abortion. When the Senate Democrats changed that language, they knew that it would make it much more difficult to get this bill, get that language through the House, and yet they were willing to do that. And the only way to really ensure that federal taxpayer dollars are not used on abortion, it is to defeat this Senate health care bill in the House, and we continue to urge our colleagues to do that.
As a courtesy to members of the media, members are voting and will come back upstairs for question and answer and additional statements. Let me say this is a disappointing moment for millions of Americans who cherish the sanctity of human life. And it's also a disappointing moment for millions of Americans who understand that it's morally wrong to take the taxpayer dollars of pro-life Americans and use it to promote abortion at home and abroad. While there's been great division in this country over the years on the subject of elective abortion, there's been overwhelming support in this country for prohibiting the use of taxpayer dollars to provide and promote abortion at home and abroad. The legislation that is poised to pass the Congress today would, for the first time, provide public funding for elective abortion in America. And it is opposed on that principle alone by an overwhelming majority of the American people. We've been grateful for the stand that pro-life Democrat colleagues have taken up to today on this issue. House Republicans worked in concert with our Democrat colleagues to add the Stupak-Pitts amendment to the House passage of the bill to preserve 30 years of pro-life protections in the statutory law of the United States. But now, remarkably, several of our pro-life colleagues, have decided to exchange 30 years of pro-life legislation for a piece of paper from the most pro-abortion president in American history. And nobody's buying it. Nobody in the pro-life movement is buying it. Pro-life Americans aren't buying it. And we urge our colleagues at this 11th hour in this debate, stand on your commitment, not only to the right to life, but to protecting pro-life taxpayers in this country. Reject this political ploy that is the executive order, and stand with us, and we will stand with you to ensure that any health care legislation contain the historic protections of the Hyde Amendment from this point forward.
All right, so there he is, Mike Pence, a Republican of Indiana, together with his colleagues, making a last-ditch appeal to those Democrats who oppose abortion, like Bart Stupak of Michigan, to change their minds and oppose health care reform legislation. They say they are on board now. They trust the president, this executive order. He says he will sign into law immediately after the House of Representatives passes the Senate version, as well as the subsequent reconciliation bill. That bill will then go back to the Senate for consideration. It looks like the Democrats will have the 216 votes they need, but you can see the bitterness, the anger, the disappointment, deep disappointment on the part of these Republicans who had thought that Bart Stupak and these other Democrats would continue to oppose the Senate version because of the language on abortion funding. Our coverage of this important day in Washington will continue right after this.